So welcome everybody to our Industrial Insights podcast. And we're trying a new thing here, having the squad together so that we can talk about what we're all collectively seeing out there in the market. And so today's topic is negative net absorption. That's the quarter we're living in. That's kind of the theme of the year for Southern California industrial. And so I thought we would go over the numbers to see how much and how it relates to other markets on the West Coast, and then think through what does that mean for landlords and what's that mean for tenants. So can you go over what you're seeing, Grant, or go over the numbers?
Yes, I was reading a recent market report, which is pretty much going over the Inland Empire. One very surprising statistic that I saw was for the first time in 55 quarters, they lost 3.9 million square feet, which was very surprising, just how long of a period of time that is. And I guess the next thing I was thinking of, is this a sign of further troubles to come? Hopefully that's not the case, but for a lot of our clients in the IE, we've seen buildings not leasing as fast. We've seen rates drop pretty steadily. So that remains to be seen.
Yeah, and we didn't lose the buildings. They're not gone. They're not demolished. That's 3 million square feet of tenants less that are in the market compared to what the amount of inventory that's available.
I think a relative basis is also helpful because SoCal as a whole seems to be getting hit by this trend of tenants starting to downsize, expand out of state. And so on a relative basis, Los Angeles, for example, is at negative 16.7 million square feet of net absorption compared to that 3 million of negative net absorption in the IE. And so on a relative basis, the IE's fared a bit better than a neighboring county. And then Orange County is actually at negative 1 million. And then in terms of how much product is being delivered and the timing of deliveries driving that negative net absorption amount, we actually saw, only 3.3 million square feet of deliveries in Los Angeles over the last 12 months, and then 20 million square feet in the Inland Empire. So it's not necessarily the deliveries per se driving that negative net absorption number. I think it's more so on the tenant side of just pulling back and getting more efficient and looking at out-of-state options.
If you add on to that, where are people going out of state and what do those markets look like? And it's almost uncanny in that there is a proportionate amount of positive net absorption in Vegas and in Phoenix. And we see people talk or hear people talk about that all the time. But talking is one thing, making those types of decisions is another. And so what kind of companies can make that move? And more often than not, it's larger ones where the CEO or the founder isn't living in Southern California, right? So if corporate is out of state and they're working through their supply chain, then it's a little less personal, perhaps, and more just like managing the business. So our experience in Vegas and Phoenix would tell us the same thing in the sense that it's still hard to find a building, rents are still going up, and it's a different vibe. It's a different atmosphere, no doubt. So Grant, landlords. So this is the world we live in. What are we going to do about it?
I think they really have to come to terms with today's market. If you're trying to stick to pricing of last year or even 21, you're not going to be able to get your building leased in the time period that you really want it to. You could potentially see your buildings sit on the market for 6 months to 8 months, sadly. And I think that's where brokers like us really come into play, being able to educate our clients, letting them know today's landscape is going to be really imperative for them getting their buildings leased to good tenants. And moving forward, it's just all about education and understanding the current landscape.
And then once you understand it, like making it easier for tenants to tour, making more information available for tenants to share with their team, whether that's the virtual walkthroughs or whether that's extra pictures or whether that's like a video that's less than a minute on your phone that you can text to them that they can send to the ops guy or the CEO. I found all those ways of being able to get any part of the tour experience into tenants' hands and on their phones and on their computers easier and faster. Helps them make decisions, helps them get the energy to get touring, and helps differentiate one building from another. And another thing I found super helpful is these change reports where you can look at within a specific segment of a project that you're leasing and 30-day increments of what other buildings near you have come on the market, come off the market, have changed their pricing or gone from withheld pricing to published. And it's amazing to see for a lot of these buildings for landlords we're working for, you'll see 5 new buildings come on the market and you'll see 3 price reductions and you'll see like 1 space be absorbed. And so when you see that, then you realize like you're not trying to catch a falling knife, but you do want to be that next one that's absorbed. And so there's many things you can do, but trying to make sure you hit everything from a pricing perspective and from a marketing perspective as possible.
Yeah, I think the last piece of that puzzle is also timing, having those renewal conversations a bit earlier with your tenant. Tenants are starting to think more in advance now in expectations of a renewal proposal. And so having that conversation earlier, you can get their appetite and begin to plan accordingly, since it does take a few months longer than, say, last year to lease out a building. And so the earlier you can get started and put it on the market and make other tenants aware of it, now that the other prospective tenants have their timing pushed out, is another way that you can try and appeal to a wider base.
Can you say that another way or expand upon that, Chris? To landlords, you got tenants, you got a tenant that's up, and how should you be approaching them?
Exactly. And when is the biggest question. And so 18 months ago, in the heat of the market, maybe you would have waited, because then maybe they didn't have any other relocation options, or when everything was increasing rapidly, waiting to as close to the expiration date as possible might have been helpful in maximizing your renewal rent. But now that the market is a bit softer, tenants are a lot more in transition, and space is taking longer to lease, it's in your best interest as a landlord to maybe have that conversation sooner, start engaging the tenant. And if things aren't working out, then you have a little bit more time to put the space on the market. And so that will allow you to minimize your downtime, because what you want to avoid is waiting 30 days out from expiration. Your tenant ends up leasing another building, and now you've got 30 days to find a new tenant, when the average time to lease out a building right now is more like 3 months, 2 or 3 months, let's say, for example. So the sooner you can have those conversations, the sooner you can align each other's interests, and then the sooner you can take the appropriate action before the expiration date.
Oh, yeah. And that 30 days could be 6 months, or could be 9 months, or could be a year. And we're not past a year, maybe, until you get over.
Well, I think it's been pretty amazing to see a lot of the more savvy landlords in today's market have been engaging their tenants pretty much a year prior to expiration of lease, which was unheard of over the past 3 years.
Last topic, and we'll close it out. Landlords and tenants working together, then facing problems like an impasse in a negotiation, and then brokers like being called to help. We see that a lot. It's interesting. It's good that it's happening in the sense of whatever it takes to bring the market together. But that changes things for the experience that a landlord and a tenant have in a negotiation. So maybe, Grant, you can be the tenant, and Chris, you be the landlord. So, Grant, why would you, if you call in a tenant halfway through your negotiation, how's that typically look?
Well, kind of like I alluded to for today's market for landlords and like rental rates and how to get it leased, there is a good amount of education that is still needed for tenants in today's marketplace, because 5 years ago they signed leases that were, to say the least, much lower than they are going to be today. So being able to educate them early about what their renewal rate's going to be, letting them know that a renewal is not their only option, letting them know that in today's marketplace, vacancy is up. There are many options for them. So giving them an early idea of what that landscape will be like will be imperative for them to negotiate a more digestible lease rate and deal for them.
So if you're halfway through a negotiation and then you realize vacancy is higher than you thought, lease up is longer than you thought, and there's more buildings to look at than you thought, that might change your perspective.
Yeah.
And how about you, Mr. Landlord Chris? So you're working with your tenants, and your tenants are like, I can't stomach this. I don't know. And then their broker pops up out of nowhere and says, I'm the new sheriff in town. What do you do? Or why is that good? Or why is that bad?
Yeah, so if a broker, there's a term now called parachuting, where they come in after a few rounds or a few months of renewal negotiations, and then all of a sudden they come in with an aggressive proposal and a tenant broker fee in there. Now, that's not always bad, right? If they can get them to step up to the plate and educate them and spend their own time, then that's totally worthwhile. But from my perspective as a landlord, say I'm an asset manager, and I've been talking with this tenant directly, maybe for the last few months, maybe a lot of the work I feel has already been done. And so that's one perspective. Now, only say half the work has been done. So if Grant can come in and help me get it across the finish line, then I think everyone's kind of happy here. We're starting to see that more where brokers are getting called in after a few rounds of negotiations where maybe tenants think they can do it on their own or think that their landlord will cut them a better deal if they go direct. And then after that doesn't quite work out as planned, then the broker gets involved. From a landlord's perspective, it could look a little bit delayed.
There's a lot that we experience with tenants who have opinions, and how often are their opinions and market the same? And usually there's a pretty good amount of space. And so for them to step up to the plate knowing that they have someone they can trust that has their interests aligned, that's oftentimes what gets that second half over the finish line to get a deal done. And I know everyone is happier with a deal done and NOI in their pro forma and occupancy up. And I don't really see people look back and say that 2% I paid that broker crushed my pro forma. And, I wish I hadn't have gotten all that rent income coming in. It'd be great for landlords to never have to pay commissions, but that's such a small piece of the pie when it comes to keeping a portfolio full.